One of many people's favorite Star Trek characters, I think for good reason, is Spock, right? The Vulcan who thinks of everything very logically, and the whole Vulcan culture is logic, not emotions. And I think especially among Christians, and maybe even especially among Catholics, we've tried to take on his approach of logic, not emotion. And it's great. Rationality and logic are really good. But the Vulcan culture, exemplified by Spock, of trying to suppress emotion, is actually a viewpoint that leads to the vicious habit of intemperance. Hello, welcome to Africa, New Mexico, the channel where we look at things of wonder from the perspectives of faith and reason, philosophy and theology. I'm your host, Daniel Kelly, and today we're going to be looking at what I think is one of the most wondrous things of all, is emotion, and especially emotion in the context of the Christian life. And the question is, because we're not fully in control of our emotions, right? We can form them better and stuff. What's the proper response to emotions? And for better treatment of that, I recommend William C. Mattinson III's book, Introducing Moral Theology. It's an introduction book, but he talks about this really well. And unlike many textbooks that I had to use, it's actually really good. And I recommend just reading it for your personal growth. But throughout history, there's kind of been these three approaches to how we should respond to emotions since we're not fully in control of them. One is the Stoics, right? The Stoics kind of saw life as nothing's good or bad except we make it so. It's how we view everything. And there's a very good thing in that, a very good seed in that, where what we're in charge of is us. The way we respond to situations and stuff is us. So, although as Catholics we should know that things are intrinsically good or bad, whether or not we want them to be. There are good events and bad events, and there are things that are actually good or actually bad. But the seed of goodness is, the way we respond is what we have control over. And if we're taking this viewpoint too far, or what I would say is too far, is if we're like, okay, in emotions we're not fully in control of, so we need to, as much as possible, try to get rid of those. And so then there's kind of middle way that probably Plato thought this way, maybe not. Definitely people like Kant, is you're not in control all of your emotions, so what we should do is, sometimes they help us do virtuous things, sometimes not. Just kind of not worry about them too much. They don't add anything or subtract from anything. So kind of this middle way, emotions could be helpful for stirring us up, but they're unreliable, so emotions are no good. And some people might think, that's the Christian. That's the good way for a Christian to look at it. But actually, the answer to that is no. If we're following Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, obviously very intelligent people, emotion is actually an integral part of the virtuous life. We're not just, I think one thing sometimes we miss as Christians is we're, especially in today's culture, we want to just be disembodied. We just want to be all in our heads. Well, we're not all in our heads. Jesus became incarnate, and the just all being in your heads, being overly spiritual, there's a name for that, and it's a heresy, and it's called Gnosticism, and it's not good. And St. Thomas and Augustine, they would actually show that to be a fully virtuous person, you actually have to use your emotions. Your emotions have to be integrated in the virtuous life. Pretty crazy, right? So right now, let's look at the different levels of living virtuously that have been developed in the Catholic tradition. Obviously, this isn't church teaching, this is theological thought, but there's these four levels, and this goes back to even Aristotle. So the four levels of virtue are, there's the vicious person who has vicious habits. He wants the wrong things, and he's completely good with that. What he wants, he's going to seek out are bad things, and he's made habits of this. That's the vicious person. Then there's the incontinent person, the person that he sees that the things he wants are wrong, and he kind of feels bad about it, but he's still pursuing those things. So he's not as bad as the vicious person, but he's still pursuing bad things. Those are the not virtuous people. Then there's two levels of kind of higher virtuous people. There's the continent person, who he chooses the right things, and that's really, really good, but he still wants bad things, right? He hasn't developed his habits in such a way where he sees that's bad, so he's not going to do those sinful things, but he still desires them, right? So he still isn't fully on board with what is good. And then the virtuous person not only does good things, not only does good actions, but he wants to do them, right? And he does it with pleasure and promptness, right? Kind of how St. Thomas says it. When we see what is good, and we do it with pleasure and promptness. And what do we mean by what's good or what's evil? Well, it's what's in accord with reality. What is actually good, what's actually bad. When we act in accord with reality habitually, that's a virtuous person. When we seek what is actually good, that's a virtuous person. And a vicious person is a person who doesn't act in accord with reality. They seek things that are not actually the highest good for them, right? So they seek evil things. So they're not living in accord with reality. How do emotions play into all this? Well, emotions are a judgment about reality, right? So if I'm afraid, I'm judging that this thing that I'm afraid of is something to be scared of. It's a scary thing. And my emotions are making that judgment. Maybe my reason's not. Maybe my reason's telling my emotions, hey, not. But the emotions are a kind of judgment. And we see in John 7:24 that Jesus is telling us as Christians we need to judge things rightly. So our emotions are really, really important for judging what is the right thing, what is in accord with reality. We want our heart's response to things in reality, things that we're encountering, to be in accord with that. What does this have to do? So which virtues in particular? So there's the virtues are habits of doing the right thing, of acting in the right way, and acting in accord with reality. And classically, there's these different, we divide virtue into like temperance, prudence, fortitude, these different virtues. And then, of course, the three most important being faith, hope, and love, and, charity. Those are the most important theological virtues, but all these are habits of goodness, right? Of choosing what's good. So if we're looking at which of the virtues do emotions really play into, and the answer is, well, all of the virtues, but there's one in particular, temperance. Temperance is the virtue that we want to seek out pleasures in accord with what they're really worth. Seek out these good things that bring us pleasure. That's why they bring us pleasures, because they're good, in accord with reality. That's what temperance, we have a habit of seeking out these good things, these things that give us pleasure in the amount that they should be sought out, right? So, and we know that opposed to every virtue, a virtue is in the middle, opposed to every virtue are two vicious habits that oppose it, right? So for fortitude, there would be the vicious habit of recklessness. You don't value the things, the goods that you have, such as your life, highly enough, so you just risk them disproportionately. That's recklessness, and it's opposed to the virtue of courage or fortitude. And then there's the other vicious habit that opposes the vice that opposes courage, which would be cowardice, where you're not willing to risk the goods that you have for greater goods. So we see for fortitude, those are the two vices, the two vicious habits that oppose this virtue, this good habit. What about for temperance? Temperance is, I want to seek the right amount of these pleasures. Well, you could be intemperate in that you seek these things that are good, that give you pleasure, too much, like a drunkard. That's the classic example of an intemperate person. He's got this vice where he seeks the good of alcohol too much so that it's not a good for him, right? So he's seeking it too much. But you can be intemperate just as easily seeking too little of a good, right? And that's where we're seeing people like the Vulcan culture, where they say, okay, we just shut down emotions. That's what we're going to do, is shut them down. Well, that's being intemperate. That's seeking this good too little, and that's not living in accord with reality. So that's a vicious habit. That's a vice, which Vulcan culture would encourage. Let's read real quick from Mattinson. He explains really well how this virtue of temperance is not just excluding things like too much drink, but it includes things. The person who experiences real sexual passion for their spouse, whom they dearly love, is temperate. The person who enjoys and desires a nice meal is temperate. The person whose ire is raised at injustice, ire mean like angry, is temperate, as is the person who fears things that ought to be feared. Temperance is not an absence of passion or emotion, but rather well-ordered desire. So it's important to have these emotions. And does that just apply to these emotional activities like what he mentioned? Being angry at injustice, the right amount, that's temperance. Feeling the right amount of attraction to our spouse, that's temperance. Well, it actually affects our whole moral life, having these well-ordered emotions. Why? Because, and this is what Stoicism and this kind of Vulcan mindset gets wrong, is because we're not just supposed to do the right thing for the right reasons. Right, so Kant would be famously, he's all like, we should just do it from duty. Don't worry about the emotions. Actually, it can be better if we're doing it against our inclinations. And the Christian tradition would agree, yeah, you do the right thing just because it's right, wherever your emotions are at. But it's better to do it the right thing for the right reasons, and feel pleasure at that, because you're living in accord with reality. And the thing is, if we don't have our emotions, if we've just shut them down, we're not going to be able to act with pleasure and promptness as easily. So St. Thomas says the virtuous person chooses the right thing for the right reasons with pleasure and promptness. That's what we're supposed to do. And our emotions help us to respond to these situations with alacrity. We choose the right thing if we've ordered our emotions rightly, quickly, because we just know our emotions, because we're embodied creatures, our body and soul composite knows right away, this is the way I need to. I don't have time to think it out through this logical, rational process. A lot of times I just have to respond in a virtuous manner, right? So we can see with a habit, which is what virtue is a good habit, we would need our emotions to be part of it. Because we could be like the continent person, that his emotions aren't on board, we're still doing the good things, but it's harder for him to react quickly with alacrity, that's a sub-virtue of prudence, to situations that arise that you didn't plan for. So, right, it's not courageous, to use a different example, to be not afraid of something that you should be afraid of. It's not courageous if you're in a war and they're using chemical weapons or something, and you're not afraid of that. That's not courageous. That's not living in accord with reality. Your emotions should judge that, yeah, this is a situation we should be afraid of. Courage is being willing to risk the good of your life or whatever goods for a higher good. That's what courage is. So if we don't have the right emotions, we're not actually being virtuous in these situations. A big part of charity, which is the highest commandment of loving God and our neighbors, should be our emotions. If we still need to love our neighbors whether or not our emotions are in line, right? Just like I could be prone to anger. That's too bad. That's not good as part of my makeup. And that's something maybe a cross I have to deal with. But it would be better if I'm not prone to anger. And it would be better if when I love my neighbor and God, my emotions are in accord with that. That's not always going to happen, but that's the better thing. And I think Pope Francis talks about how we need our emotions really well in his recent encyclical Delexit Nos. And that Delexit Nos is such a good encyclical. I encourage you to read it. And I've done videos on it. You can go check those out. But I want to just highlight a couple parts from his encyclical that will help us understand how important emotions are in the moral life. And it's not just And this here, we see how emotions help us judge reality rightly. In Dilexit No. 16, the Holy Father says, "This unique power of the heart also helps us to understand why, when we grasp a reality with our heart, we know it better and more fully. This inevitably leads us to the love of which the heart is capable. For the inmost core of reality is love." So if we've grasped something with our heart, with our emotions and everything else, we know it better than just if we grasp it with our minds. So it's important that our emotions aren't just suppressed, but that they're rightly ordered. And the Holy Father reminds us later on in section 44, Jesus' words show that his holiness did not exclude deep emotions. On various occasions, he demonstrated a love that was both passionate and compassionate. He could be deeply moved and grieved, even to the point of shedding tears. It is clear that Jesus was not indifferent to the daily cares and concerns of people, such as their weariness or hunger. "I have compassion for this crowd. They have nothing to eat. They will faint on the way, and some of them have come a great distance." Mark 8, 2-3. Right? So Jesus is deeply moved by things. And that's the way it should be. He's the best human being there could be. We should be moved at the level of our emotions. We shouldn't just suppress them. We should be moved by things that deserve to move our emotions. Jesus became incarnate. He became flesh. And we need to stop trying to get rid of our embodied, ensouled nature, right? We're body and soul. We need to embrace that to live a fully virtuous life. So I hope that was helpful for you. I hope that you can see why Christians need to not just suppress emotions like Mr. Spock, and Mr. Spock is awesome. We need to, and the logical part of our brain and figuring stuff out is very important. That's a good part of Vulcan society. A bad part, that if Vulcans were real, we'd need to Christianize, is their culture saying, hey, we need to be intemperate in getting rid of our emotions. So I hope this was really helpful for you. I hope it made you think, especially during this Lenten time where we're supposed to be growing in our faith. And I just wanted to leave you with one more quote. I'll finish off with this quote from Dilexit Nos from our Holy Father. And this is from section 60. "The eternal Son of God, in his utter transcendence, chose to love each of us with a human heart. His human emotions became the sacrament of that infinite and endless love." So important. His human emotions became the sacrament of that infinite and endless love. "His heart then is not merely a symbol for some disembodied spiritual truth. In gazing upon the Lord's heart, we contemplate a physical reality, his human flesh, which enables him to possess genuine human emotions and feelings like ourselves, albeit fully transformed by his divine love. Our devotion must ascend to the infinite love of the person of the Son of God, yet we need to keep in mind that his divine love is inseparable from his human love. The image of his heart of flesh helps us to do precisely this." So we don't want to get rid of emotions. We want our emotions to be like Jesus's.